Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. When my niece Marcia was just 9 years old, she wrote a line that stops almost everyone in their tracks. Marcia had an assignment which involved writing out the autobiography of a pencil, and her first line was, "I am a pencil. Every day I grow shorter." Notice the drama in that line? No matter whether we have to give a speech, we have to deliver a webinar, or write an article, we could all do with great first lines. However, what makes an outstanding first line is the question that we're asking. The answer lies in writing not an exciting line, but a boring one. Which is cool because we all know how to write boring lines. But how do we wring the excitement from it? Let's find out using these 3 simple techniques. The first is the power of questions. The second is contrast or creating a U-turn. And the third is the usage of specifics. But first, we must start with the boring. To write a great line, you should ideally start with something boring. For example, and here are a whole bunch of examples. First one, the boy got on a bus. That's boring. I saw Kara at school today. Boring again. The journalist was due to fly home. So these are 3 extremely boring lines. There's nothing even remotely interesting about those lines, and yet they're about to become exceedingly interesting simply by what follows. Not all lines have to be so subdued. Sometimes there's a story that you can't hold down, no matter how much you try. However, we'll get to that part later. Right now, we're all classically trained to be boring, so it's a good starting point. Once we have that boredom in place, let's add a bit of drama. Let's take those lines again. The boy got on a bus. He would never get off. I saw Kara at school today, but all I noticed were a pile of clothes. The journalist was due to fly home. 2 hours before takeoff, he was detained. You noticed, didn't you? And you probably realized that it wasn't important whether it was 1 line or 2, but that the drama went up several levels just in a few seconds. It was just there, like a warm, northerly wind blowing, and the next moment it was a full-blown gale. And there are many possible combinations to get to the first and second line. But let's explore a few options, because the fewer we have, the better we can get at creating the drama. Let's start out with the one which is the thing we do the most, which is ask questions. And that's the first part that we'll cover in this episode. The power of asking a question or an embedded question. Here are some examples. A single bubble is always a sphere, but what happens when 12 bubbles touch each other? Notice that's a question. Let's take another question. Have you ever wondered how many words a professional writer writes in a day? Another question. If you were Alexander the Great, how many cities would you name after yourself? Or which product should you pre-sell? Should it be the $20 product or the $2,000 product? And finally, we'll wrap up with another question, which is, does it take 21 days to create a habit or 21 seconds? When you start off with a question, it always stops the readers in their tracks, and it seems such an obvious ploy to simply use a question at the start of your article. But just because it's obvious to you as a writer doesn't mean that the reader sees it the same way. The person reading the article is doing so simply to satisfy their own curiosity. And if you ramp up the question, you ramp up that curiosity, then you've started to reel the reader in. If we examine just a few of the question-based first lines, you'll see how you too feel that gravitational pull. If you were Alexander the Great, how many cities would you name after yourself? Which product should you pre-sell? Should it be the $20 product or the $2,000 one? Does it take 21 days to create a habit or 21 seconds? So these are all questions. And immediately your brain goes off in some direction trying to resolve it, but it can't resolve it, so it has to read the article. Or at least start on the journey to read that article. However, it's not just a matter of putting the question mark at the end of the sentence. The fact or premise must already have a few dollops of curiosity. And the way to find this curiosity is to figure out why you're writing the article in the first place. Let's say you're writing about how to design a postcard. Well, what's curious about designing a postcard, you may ask? And this depends on the angle, the subtopic that you're covering. If you stay at the top level, which is how to design a postcard, then you find yourself stuck because you're at that topic level, you're at that bird's eye view level, and you need to go down at least to a subtopic or even lower down to a subtopic level. Hence, the topic would be how to design a postcard, and the subtopic would be how to design an odd-sized postcard, and a subtopic would be why an odd-sized postcard gets 300% greater response. Because without that groundwork of a topic, the subtopic, and possibly the subtopic, it's a lot harder to come up with great first lines. But once you have your first subtopic, which is how to design an odd-sized postcard, now you have a premise in place. The question that naturally arises is, why should I create an odd-sized postcard? Now you've created that curiosity. We have made more space for questions, haven't we? And then we get more questions, like if I had $100, would I spend it on Facebook ads or postcards? Which is more effective, an email newsletter to your clients or a postcard? As you can see, we can drum up all of these questions one after the other once we go past our main topic level and to the subtopic level. And usually you're the aspiring expert or already the expert on this level, and maybe you don't feel like an expert, but you already know a lot. You can come up with all of these questions that people are asking anyway on the internet. You go to a site like Quora on a topic like copywriting, and you see all these questions on copywriting, and those become the questions that go in the first line of your article. We all have a natural sense of curiosity, and when you take a question and you put it in the first line, if that question is succinct enough, if it's sharp enough, then immediately the reader has to read and go through the rest of the article if that question is good enough. And funnily, a question arises from that last statement, which is, what if we were to run questions in article after article after article after article? Won't the reader notice? Would you notice? Can you remember the last article you wrote? What was the headline? Do you remember whether you started with a statement or a question? See, our brains can hardly remember what we had for lunch yesterday, which means that they are not precisely keeping track of the first line of the article. Which is to say that you could write questions on an ongoing basis and no one will notice. However, maybe you don't want to do that. And questions are just one way to get that first line rolling. If it's variety you seek, we always have another option. And one of my favorite options is the same as Marsha's line, which was the pencil getting shorter. And this is the contrast, the U-turn, which is to say that we're going one way and then, in a swift, unexpected move, we're facing the opposite direction. Let's find out how it's done. How do we create that U-turn? How red is red? Seems like an odd question, doesn't it? But the intensity of red depends solely on where the color is placed. So you take that red and you put it right next to brown, and it kind of looks dull. And then you take that red and put it near yellow or a bright green or a black, and it starts to shine. And that so-called shine is merely a factor of contrast. A lot of our first lines, especially the ones that start out being boring, they could do with a bit of contrast. Again, we have to look at examples, so let's look at the first few lines. First example, in 2009, I flew to Chicago to speak at an event for free, and I made $20,000. Second line, if you learned English as a child, your first letter would not have been S. The third one, my father ran a secretarial college, and one of his students was a con man. And our line that we used before as well, which is a question. Does it take 21 days to create a habit or 21 seconds? And finally, imagine you invented a set of tires and your invention was ridiculed. So all of these have that contrast. They're all going one way, and then suddenly they swing around with that U-turn. Let's go over why those lines are so interesting. The Chicago event was an unpaid speaking event. It said, I went there for free, and then does a U-turn, $20,000. So that's the excellent dividends, and there's that contrast. The secretarial college, that's a safe space. No one wants a con man running around. Again, we have contrast. 21 days of a habit? Well, how about 21 seconds? Well, that's intense contrast, isn't it? When we look at more examples, you can spot the boring first part, and then you can see the surprising U-turn. Let's take a few more examples. The most likely place to find a Singapore Airlines stewardess in training is in the nursing home. There are two types of grass on the Serengeti. The wildebeest avoid one completely. There's a hotel in Los Angeles that gets the highest ratings on TripAdvisor. It's not a big hotel, and it's not even very classy. In every instance, we have this message, this idea going in one way, and then swinging quite the other way. Something that's totally unexpected. And you can create contrasts in many ways, but even if you just go, I went there free and then I got paid, it was a safe space and then it became unsafe. If you create that kind of intensity, then you're on your way to creating really good first lines. And you can find a lot of them on the Psychotactics site. So go through the articles, there's the blog, and go through the articles and just look at the first line. And that's how you can train yourself. And of course, you might find a lot of rubbish ones, which happens, as it should. And at least you'll know at that point in time, wait, this is something that needs to be paid attention to when you're writing that first line. What we've covered so far is the fact that we can use a question to create that first line. And the second is that U-turn, that contrast. This takes us to the third part, which is the usage of specifics. (1492), 1947, 29th February. Each of those numbers has an explicit connotation. While the rest of the world may gloss over 1492, it holds a special place for Americans as it's the year of Columbus's voyage to the New World. 1947, on the other hand, is the year the Indian subcontinent, namely India, Pakistan, and East Pakistan, which is Bangladesh, got their independence from the British. And 29 February, well, that's just the extra day we seem to get as a bonus every leap year. What's clear to us is that numbers are specifics, and they have an exceptional hold on our imagination. Let's just go through a few first lines, shall we? Back in 2003, I was in real trouble when it came to writing articles. Imagine yourself in a helicopter over Milwaukee, USA, on the morning of 13th June 1998. Josh Furr, a journalist for Slate magazine, decided to do something quite bizarre. And finally, in the late 1970s, when you asked for a coffee to go, you had to tear a hole in the plastic lid just to drink the coffee. So what we see here are days and timings and years and names of magazines and a person's name. And there are all sorts of numbers and details and specifics that get our attention, don't they? Yet snuggled in the middle of all of those first lines is the story of Josh Furr and Slate magazine. You may not recognize Furr as the US National Memory Champion. You may have no idea that a magazine like Slate even exists. But you feel like reading just a little bit. Even so, it's very dicey to have so many unknown factors in the first line. Readers don't necessarily follow a thread because you've loaded it with specifics. They do so because there's a tiny little story unfolding. And if there is no curiosity level, then they'll just abandon the article. Let's look at a first line that has specifics, but ends up quite ho-hum. Here's the first example. When the Lascaux cave complex was discovered in 1940, the world was amazed. A second example. In the early 1980s, the carrot production industry operated at a very low profit margin. Both of them have specifics. They should be interesting, but they're boring. I mean, who cares that people were amazed because of some caves? Who cares that the carrot industry operated at a very low profit margin? There's no story in it. So they need some oomph to get them to the status of a great first line. For example, in 1947, the Indian subcontinent got their independence. But by 1948, more than 15 million people had been uprooted, and between 1 and 2 million people were dead. A second example, in 1492, Christopher Columbus made landfall in America, and part of the success of the trip was due to biscuits, hardtack biscuits. Of the three methods to get an intriguing first line, the specifics might be the easiest and yet the most difficult. A question almost begs for an answer, the U-turn or contrast. It starts off being boring and then there's this bendy twist that keeps your attention. The specifics, on the other hand, they don't follow any formula. The only overriding theme of this third method is to find something that's already powerful in the first instance, and then to bring it up to that first line. In the US, Columbus is almost admired and hated at the same time. And yet, there are aspects of his journey that are hard to ignore. So what we're doing is, if we're going to write an article that starts off with the Columbus story, we have to dig a bit. And there is lots of stuff online. If you go to history.com, which is where I went to get this information, you get all these juicy details. Like the biscuits, for example. Or that the so-called ships, Nina and Pinta, they were not ships at all, but they were fast-moving caravels that had fewer than 30 crew, and that Columbus, for his maiden journey, chose to use an updated version of the caravel Redondo, which had both square and lateen sails to help control navigation, especially on the coastal lines. Which is to say that when you're digging for specifics in your own story, or some fact, there needs to be some mystery or surprise. If you're telling the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears and you've heard that story over and over again, well, how about the angle where Goldilocks is arrested for breaking in and robbery? Now that's surprise. So it's a factor of getting to that storyline from a different angle or finding something surprising. I did say this third one was a little difficult. Nonetheless, if you're unsure of your first line and you just want some feedback, then go to a forum like 5000 BC, which is the psychotactics forum, and don't post the entire article. Ask for just that first line feedback. Just post the first line and see if the audience is keen to know more. However, you can do this testing just about anywhere. I often speak with friends or clients on WhatsApp, and that's one method that I'd use, just having some sort of chat system. Or I'll go for a walk with my wife, Renuka, and I'll run the line past her, and then I'll wait for an analysis. Usually, the person listening or reading it shouldn't need to analyze anything. And that tells you that your line is evocative because they want to know more. Whether you choose the question format, you've pulled a U-turn, or you've added specific, it's up to you. But in some cases, a line can have all three. Even so, it might be a good idea to start with just one type, like just do question after question after question, and then write dozens of these so that you get comfortable with the method. And once you get that fluency moving, then you can go to the U-turn or the contrast, and then finally to the specifics. What I'm saying is that don't jump and try and do all three together. Do 10, 20, 30 of the questions and see how they go. Then do the next batch and see how it goes. And that's really how you get to fluency. And it might sound like practice, but it's really second nature. It's allowing your brain to see those fragments that make something interesting and exciting. Practice can be really boring. What you're doing is making it second nature. And when you do that, go to the second one, then try the third one. And specifics jump in anyway. Specifics will show up in most of the questions and the U-turn anyway, which means that you're on your way to becoming a pro at the first line. Whether it's a webinar, a presentation, a speech, or an article, your first line is going to matter. So go ahead, make it count. That brings us to the end of this podcast. You remember what we did, don't you? We started out with a question-based first line, and that worked really well. We then looked at the U-turn, which is put a boring first line and then turn it around. And finally, we looked at specifics, but the specifics had to be interesting already. We can't just slip in a whole bunch of numbers. What would I start with? I would start with questions. And these questions are already online, so you don't even have to think about them. If you go to a site like Quora.com, that's Quora, you'll find that there are already these questions on your topic. So go there because they're already pre-written for you. They've already been kind of edited to be sharp and snappy. So your work is already half done there. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in psychotactics land. Here we are on the cusp of the article writing course. On the 21st of March, you get the chance to sign up for the article writing live course. Now, this is live in the sense that there is no video and there is no fancy stuff that you see on other courses. Instead, the goal is to get a result. And what is that result? It's very precise. By the end of the course, within 45 minutes to an hour, you will write a complete article. No more dread, no more taking 3 days to write an article and getting frustrated about it. And this course goes over 3 months. It's done through a forum. Yes, I know that's last century systems, but it's one of the most effective ways. It doesn't have all of the distractions. You'll find that you will be hankering for this kind of system of training, and you'll want to probably implement it yourself. So it's just worth it doing the course for that reason alone. But it does get booked up very quickly. There are only 20 seats, and the next time we're going to do this course is in 2022. So yeah, I know, scarcity and urgency. So 21st of March, that's the article writing live. And 28th of March, if you don't want to do the live thing and you want to go at your own pace, then that's the home study. For both of these, you have to go to psychotactics.com/AW goodies, because that's the waiting list. That's also where you get your goodies. So AW stands for article writing. So psychotactics.com/AW goodies. But the journey to writing starts off with outlining. And there is also a very good book on the Psychotactics site. You want to go there and have a look. And it's about how do you outline. And this is stuff that people hate, because in school they were told to create outlines. And this book covers outlines in a completely non-school, non-frustrating manner. And you'll see it for yourself. But outlining speeds up your whole writing process in a way that you can't imagine. To this day, I will think of an article, I'll go, okay, I'll write the article, I'll start to write, and then an hour later, I've just wasted my time. Everything's convoluted, it's not making sense, and then I have to go back and outline. And outlining doesn't take that much time. It takes probably 5 minutes, 15 minutes if you're really putting in a lot of detail. But it speeds up your writing process. So outlining it is. And come join us in 5000 BC, because when you do like a home study or when you get a book, you get stuck. I know this. If you've been hearing the podcast, I've been into photography recently and I get stuck all the time. And I don't know who to ask. And I go into Facebook. And it's like the blind leading the blind, because you go on most of those places and it's just the people who are doing the course who don't know the answers anyway. Well, that's not how it is in 5000 BC. I'm around all the time, except when we're on vacation, which is 3 months in a year. But other than that, you can ask your questions a whole lot of the time. Some people have been asking questions like 20 times, 30 times, 40 times in a row. Same question. And, if you're stuck, it's very frustrating. So I don't have to tell you that. We'll see you on 5000bc.com, or if you want to get on the course, psychotactics.com/AW goodies. That's me from Psychotactics Land. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? Well, I really didn't know what to say at this point in time, because I kind of run out of ideas. It's 5 o'clock in the morning and I didn't know what to continue with. But I remembered a poem that we learned in school. I think it was Desiderata or something like that. And the first line was, "The boy stood on the burning deck when all but he had fled." That's a great line, isn't it? And there you see that contrast. There are no specifics. Well, the deck is burning, but there are no specifics. We don't know who the boy is. We don't know where the deck is. But we know that there is the contrast, that he stood on the burning deck when all but he had fled. That's it from me. I'll see you in 5000 BC, or I'll see you on the article writing course. Bye for now.